I mean, you have Houthis shooting off 20,000 drones, and we're sending $10 million missiles to shoot them down.
It's
And
$10 million to take out 20,000,
right,
$20,000.
and the problem is you go with a numbers game. When the Houthis first sent ballistic missiles, this is something, if you want to make a lot of money in Polymarket, get back to first principles, get back to math.
Welcome to the Oracle by Polymarket. I'm Will Ward.
And I'm Mahdi Ali.
And today we're on with John Konrad, who is a former merchant marine captain and also the founder of G Captain, which is one of the top online publications covering global shipping and trade, and also the author of Fire on the Horizon, which is a nonfiction book on the BP Deepwater Horizon Gulf of Mexico spill. John, thanks for coming on. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me, guys. It's a beautiful day in Western Mass. We had snow last week. Today, beautiful.
So I want to get in today all the stuff, your predictions on tariffs, geopolitics, trade, Pete Hegseth, Pentagon, shipbuilding, lots of good stuff. But let's start here. So before the election, a lot of people were saying all this tariff stuff was kind of a negotiating ploy and Trump wasn't really going to do the tariffs. And now he's actually sort of done the tariffs and people are saying it's a short-term negotiating strategy. We're going to get deals. Did you expect it to play out this way?
I don't think anyone could have predicted it would play out exactly this way. I think it was fairly easy to predict that Trump would come in harsh and be willing to sit down and negotiate deals. Scott Bessent said just yesterday that the first nations that come to the table are going to get the best deals. That's something I've been saying for months. And it seems that, they want two things. They want a reciprocal deal for the U.S., something that they deem fair and equitable for both sides. And the second is, they want they want concessions, not just economic concessions, but other concessions that make it, make each negotiation a good deal.
Yeah. So I have never captained a ship, but if I put myself in the shoes of someone who's working in global trade, moving shipping containers from China to America and all that stuff, and I saw these tariff headlines, I would say this is not good for global trade. But you seem to be a supporter. You're pro-tariff. So, how do you think about the whole tariff question? Is it good for the U.S. and good for trade, or is it good for the U.S. in spite of not being great for global trade? How do you break it down?
Well, I watched your last two episodes, and your last guest, Peter Stansbury, was really anti-tariffs. And here's the thing. I completely agree with it. Tariffs are a bad deal. They're a bad deal for the world economy. They're a bad deal for the United States. Free trade does work as long as you just don't give up your factories and your merchant marine. There have to be protections, which we have not had in this nation. But here's the problem. How world trade worked for the last 20, 30 years, at least that I've been at seeing, and longer, is that we have entered a world of peace and prosperity where the oceans, we had some piracy issues in 2014 that the Navy and industry fairly quickly solved. But otherwise, it's been peaceful. Move goods the quickest route possible. The people who benefit in a geopolitical system, and I hear all the time from economists and companies, we need forecasting ability. If you make it bad over the long term. I'm going to explain why that is not feasible. But how you profit in shipping, in global trade, is very linearly moving forward, putting as many eggs in one basket. Bigger ships, bigger ports, more cargo down the most efficient routes. And that's worked very well. And not only has our economic system rewarded that, our entire education and advancement system has been geared for that. So people who are very linear thinkers, who are able to buckle down and put a lot of effort, and follow a checklist, game plan, take these APs in high school, study this amount for your SATs, go to these colleges, take these degrees, move on to these careers. People we've self-selected for linear thinkers, and it's worked out extremely well in a peaceful time. But what has happened first is the advent of technology. You had people who were nonlinear thinkers who could embrace chaos, who could maneuver in multiple companies at once, maybe not press forward ahead in one individual field, but maneuver around obstacles. They could not get venture funding. They could not get bank funding. And then PayPal hit it big. Peter Thiel, a nonlinear thinker, Elon Musk, a nonlinear thinker, David Sachs, a nonlinear thinker, started investing in other nonlinear thinkers in Silicon Valley. And the ability of these companies to maneuver around problems and enter new markets, leave markets when they're non-profitable, be nimble, agile, move fast, that has been extremely profitable. But then we saw in 2016 that nonlinear thinking hit the very linear Washington, and everyone was like, what's going on? Government's breaking. It's not breaking. It was nonlinearity, social media and this technology hitting against the very linear system. Well, now we are doing this in global trade. China is no longer willing to have the free market movements of goods. Russia, Iran, we have low water levels in the Panama Canal, which have now done better. We had shipping port congestion crisis. We have the Houthis in the Red Sea. We have Russian and Ukrainian mines in the Black Sea. So now what is happening is the people who have been selected, the CEOs of all our major corporations, the major economists, the people who have profited well under this very peaceful time, they are not the type of people who can manage in chaos and complexity and maneuver around. And they're, unwilling to give up the reins and give it over to nonlinear thinkers. They're unwilling, for the most part. Look at Polymarket. I mean, how many markets you have, and you can move in one market and out of another market. This is the future. This is the future of global trade. And whether I'm saying I hate tariffs. I don't want tariffs. I don't want geopolitical instability. I want to go rewind the clock to 10 years ago and put more protections in for U.S. factories. But the enemy gets a vote. China gets a vote. Russia gets a vote. The Houthis get a vote. And we're not returning to that system. So no matter what you want to, no matter how much you love tariffs or not love tariffs, we can't go back to a free trade, zero tariff world, because that does not match the security and geopolitical environment of today.
John, I understand the idea that we want to bring back some critical supply chains. We want to make our weapons. We want to make our semiconductors. We want to make these kind of things. Okay. What about, let's take the garment industry, for example, right? You have American companies, you have Nike buying T-shirts from Bangladesh for $5 and selling them for $60. Why do we want that $5 of which is, maybe there's 25 to 50 cents of margin back in the United States?
Well, I mean, there have been successful American apparel until they collapsed for marketing and other reasons, did very well making T-shirts in the United States. There's a market for that. And once you build out these factories, if we have a war, for instance, you're going to need canvas, you're going to need uniforms, you're going to need goods. So we don't want to take, the very low cost items. Does it matter if we make Hanes underwear? I don't really think so. But it matters that we have the sewing machines, the factories in place, the people who know how to sew, the people who know how to repair sewing machines, at least some of them left in the United States, so that we can have some self-reliance.
So then the counter is like, how do we protect industries which the market doesn't want, right? The market doesn't want it here. We have to put some sort of inorganic support for these industries, either from the state or through other mechanisms, so that they stay here. Why? I guess the question comes down to is how much globalization is too much globalization?
Well, it's, the tariffs, he's looking not just on the reciprocal tariffs, but the trade policy. This is what is really hurting us. Things are not economical in the United States because of the strength of the US dollar. They are not economical in the United States because of these trade barriers, because of even fiscal things like the lack of factories. Then you have the regulatory environment to build the factories. Then you have the ability to export these things. And you have other nations, which are China, and then you have Vietnam and other nations, which are investing in the things that make businesses profitable, be it ports, be it transportation, be it energy policy. So it's, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It seems like there is a trade that needs to be made, and we're kind of seeing the same thing happen in China right now. If we want to start making stuff in the U.S., we need to weaken the dollar. We can actually look to China and see some evidence that as a country moves up the development ladder, the amount of manufacturing, basically you need to move up the chain of manufacturing, and then eventually you actually just move out of manufacturing altogether, right? Because China starts out making, little trinkets in the 80s, and then they go up and, now they're making jets and superconductor, semiconductors and all this kind of things, right? Why should the American consumer understand the tariff policy as nothing other than the weakening of the US dollar?
Well, I don't think the consumer understands the importance of the US dollar, understands a reserve currency. I don't think many economists understand the true pinnings of the reserve currency status. They definitely don't understand the maritime implications of this. Mm-hmm. And, there are debates of whether world trades 45 trillion with a T to $70 trillion. And there are debates whether the percentage of maritime trade, at least by tonnage, is 80 to 90% of world trade. So this is an enormous amount of money. But if you take money and you put it in real estate or land or Federal Reserve bonds, it doesn't really move. It's not really doing anything. It's part of the reserve currency status. It helps our status, especially in bonds. But the real reserve currency status is the liquidity in the system. Mm-hmm. And that 45 to $70 trillion of goods is moving on the ocean. And when it leaves one country and goes to another country, you have to sell those dollars to someone else. And that puts an enormous amount of liquidity in the system. And no one's tracking this. The Federal Reserve just started maritime tracking last year, or maybe 2 years ago. And they don't fully understand how this all affects everyone. We have this inflation that's persistent despite everything we do. A big part of that reason is global trade is slowing down for environmental reasons, and it's being rerouted because of geopolitical tensions. And how that plays into the economy has not been well studied because, again, the things that have been studied are near zero cost ocean transport, the moving of factories to the lowest economic wage. Again, what I want to get back to is even the experts can't understand the full underpinnings of this of the reserve currency status. I got my piece in the maritime, and I see that many other experts don't have that piece. It makes you wonder, how the policymakers, do they have a full picture of exactly why we are so powerful? But to say the average consumer understands this, I don't think the best experts understand this. The regular people do not.
But surely DC understood this for a really long time, that the most important asset the U.S. government has was the dollar and the military, right? And that seems to be changing, right? There seems to be a trade being made, the U.S. dollar for U.S. as a manufacturing hub, the U.S. as getting more fair trade deals, whatever it may be. What is it about this administration, do you think, that maybe they aren't considering the reserve status of our currency, or maybe they think they can thread the needle. Can you kind of steelman their position and give me sort of a better understanding of what's going on in Washington?
I mean, it's two things. There is major talk about devaluing the dollar, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there is talk we saw in the signal leak of part of the reason we're bombing the Houthis now is because they understand that this is tied to our reserve currency status. One of the most interesting things I think Scott Besson has said in an interview was in the All In and with Chamath Palihapitiya. He was saying that the most surprising thing of his job is he's spending 40 to 50% of his time on national security concerns. And this is a big issue. I was in the Real Vision podcast after the port congestion crisis of 2001 with one of the best analysts of container shipping, Lars Jensen. Absolutely phenomenal, deep insight into container shipping. And he said that shipping is going to reroute around the congestion eventually. It's a highly dynamic. Ships move, problems are solved. And I said, I agree fully with Lars, but I said, as these crises mount up, there's going to be residual effects for each crisis, right? Every time you have coffee, if you don't clean the cup, there's more residue in that coffee after multiple crises. And we've had multiple crises. And I said, eventually it's going to get a point where the Pentagon steps in. And there are going to be national security concerns in it. We just had a major maritime executive order signed by the president. This is absolutely excellent. A lot of us are very excited about this in the maritime industry, particularly in the United States. But look who is writing the executive order. It is the National Security Council, not the National Economic Council. The guy who's kind of the mastermind behind this, the historian, Jerry Hendricks, is a Mahanian historian and a naval guy. The Ian Bennett is a former congressional staffer and a shipbuilding Council of American lobbyists. And there are two other military guys and then shipbuilding guys. So there are no economists in there. There are no merchant marine ship captains. There are no trade people. This is national security is riding shadow on all of this tariff stuff. And there are two major implications from that. You know, when Lars Jensen finally agreed last month that I had a point, he said, okay, well, we need this demand signal for next year. Tell me from a national security standpoint, the control of these choke points of trade, which China has been going after, what is the prediction for next year? And I said, Lars, I can't answer that because it's a national security question. These are classified documents, at least the part of tariffs that are concerning national security. So you have all of these economists coming out and making predictions and saying that tariffs are terrible for this part of the economy and that part of the economy, but no one is talking about what the military implications. Point two is, you know, a lot of the Europeans, when I went to the conference, they said, well, this is a great thing that the Pentagon is finally waking up to these challenges and the Houthis and everything else. And I said, yes, it is, but these are not trade guys. These guys don't understand the balance sheet. They don't hang out on Wall Street. Their information is classified, meaning they're going to make mistakes. These are many of the same admirals and generals who led us into 20-year war in Iraq and Afghanistan. So this is not going to be a simple process. There are going to be mistakes made. The question is, can we be nimble? Can we identify mistakes and pull back and try other things? Yeah. It's not what the business community wants to hear because they want a steady demand signal because they're all linear thinkers. But that's the reality of the world we live in now.
So let me ask you this. So we're talking about kind of like the big picture strategic stuff, but this is the Polymarket podcast. So we've got some traders that are going to look for, they don't really care about what should happen. They care about what's going to happen, right? So I kind of, before we sat down, I was thinking through what are the like big picture buckets where this tariff thing could go. And I came up with 3 scenarios. So I'd be curious to hear like your thoughts on them if I'm missing anything. Scenario 1, fight, trade war with China, trade war with basically everyone all at once, Mexico, Canada, we're annexing places left and right. It's US versus the world. That seems like, one way it could go. Scenario 2, Monroe Doctrine 2.0. We're fighting China, but we're friendshoring Canada and Mexico. We're making deals with Europe. We're not invading Greenland. We're kind of playing nice with part of the world in order to isolate China. And then scenario 3, art of the deal. This is all a big bargaining chip. We're going to get deals with everyone. And basically we wake up in a year and it's kind of like tariffs are lower, kumbaya, trade is back and even better than ever. So number one, like, am I missing any major ways that this could play out? And number two, if you had to kind of gaze into the crystal ball and put odds on each of those 3 buckets, where do you think this is going?
I think the Trump administration, and I was at the White House last week talking to a lot of these individuals, I think they very much want the art of the deal. I think it's wrong to say that they don't want win-win scenarios. I think they want to work with their allies, and they want both sides. They want to negotiate deals where us and our allies win. And I don't think they particularly want to punish China or punish Russia. They want to prevent bad things from happening. So, Iran's a big question because they have nuclear weapons, and if nuclear war broke out, that's a major bad thing. They would obviously want to stop that. But I think they want to make the deal. But the problem is the enemy gets a vote, right? They can try all they want, but how does China manipulate that thing? And China does not want to come to the negotiating table. There are copyright laws. There are analysts who are studying this and working in the shadows. And then you have our allies. There are 2 things here. One is the media making an absolute villain of Trump, and the populist sway in Europe. These 2 opposing sides, which are pulling apart our country, are also pulling apart European countries, and the more liberal side seems to be the ones in the status quo in charge. So are they willing to sit down and make a deal with Trump? Bessent says whoever comes to the table first gets the big deal. You would think all the diplomats would be on the next 747 and going to the White House. That's not happening because of these political reasons. And then you have to look at how is China manipulating this trade. So, China's sneaky about this. I was talking to a major carrier a few months ago, and I said, well, what if you just ignored, I don't want to go into details of the specific rule, but China wanted them to do something, and they did it. And I said, what if you just ignored China? Because they didn't want to do it. They wanted to side with the United States, but there's no maritime expertise. There are no ship captains anywhere in the Pentagon, White House, and anywhere in Treasury. And they say, America, the government, does not understand what we're being asked to do, cannot help us. So we basically have to bow to China. I said, well, what's the worst they're going to do? Are they going to lock you out of Chinese ports and bankrupt your company? He says, no, what they do is they'll take all of the Chinese ports in the world and they'll just slow down container movements. So instead of being able to unload containers at 60 containers an hour, they'll drop down to 40, and they'll spread this around 20 ports. And it'll have a real impact on your bottom line, but it's not something that anyone can point to and say, China did this as a penalty. So as a trader, as a Polymarket, I think 2 things have to happen. I wish DC would use Polymarket as a tool. Like I said, there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and as you close up tariffs, you end up being like the little Dutch boy, plugging a finger in a hole, but the water leaks out somewhere else. All of the markets in Polymarket, you can monitor. It's a monitoring tool to see in trade, in politics, in media, where all of that water is escaping. So I think it's a tool policymakers should use. As a person who's in, using Polymarket, I think you have to realize the experts don't understand a lot of this. And a lot of what they are doing is just trying things. So you can take a large number of low-level predictions, and one of them might hit. If you can be analytical, if you can put multiple scenarios together, and if you can figure out what the big movement thing is on that, it's difficult to explain. But like I said, if you have that analytical mind where you can think of 10 scenarios at once, you have a ability to make a lot of money with these prediction markets and outthink the experts who are stuck in their lane.
So if I had to try to condense that to a bet, you said Trump wants these deals. China's not playing ball yet. It's more like the most likely scenario is that there's a pressure on China, deals elsewhere kind of thing.
Right. And the number one scenario where the U.S. takes against the world and there's a trade war, that's the rhetoric. That's the push to get deal 2 or deal 3. But it seems willing, at least in the beginning, that Trump's willing to take deal 3. The other thing, though, is Trump has a number of advisors, and he has from Scott Bessent, who's one of the most reasonable people, all the way down to Pete Navarro. And you have some military hawks who are saying full invasion. So when Panama first opened up, I was getting leaks from the Pentagon about actual war plans that were developed to take over Panama. And then the nicest thing was, hey, let's just make a little deal where U.S. Navy ships get priority and get to go through for free, and we reopen a base. So they went in with these 5 things, and Trump looks at all the ideas, and then he picks one and sends it down to the negotiating country. And then depending on their response, in that case, Panama went along with the lesser deal, the easier deal, then he can ramp up from there. But we haven't seen yet what happens when a country really fights back about this. If Panama just said, we're not negotiating with you, you cannot land at our airport, would that military plan have gone in place? I don't know.
Yeah. Let's get, I'm glad you brought up Panama because I want to get super deep on this. So right now, my understanding is U.S. owned Panama Canal, gave it back to Panama. There are Chinese ports that are operated by a Hong Kong based company that are BlackRock, a U.S. company, is trying to buy them. China vetoed that deal. What is the strategic importance to the U.S. of either just being able to transit freely versus controlling, having a U.S. company control these port operators versus actually seizing that land and owning the Panama Canal? Like, what is the difference from a geopolitical point of view versus those scenarios?
What naval warfare comes down to is sea control. The control of the moment of trade is the most important aspect. And if you are going to fight a sea control battle, it's very difficult to do in the oceans because they're so large. There's a lot of maneuver room for ships to move around and avoid enemy. But they all ships converge at these choke points, whether it's the Strait of Gibraltar, the Singapore Straits, the Taiwan Straits, or the Panama Canal. But the Panama Canal is specifically vital for us on an economic thing. Something about like 70% of the cargo is either destined interact with the United States, either import or export in one way or another. So closing that would have a huge inflationary effect as all these ships have to go around. But from a military standpoint, half of our fleet is in Norfolk, half's in San Diego, and all of our warships would have to go around South America, which would give Chinese and the Taiwan invasion an extra 2 weeks in order to get everything together. And those military supply lines would extend as well, particularly if there was sabotage of our rail or highway network. So that's a strategic, but the Panama Canal is very easy to sabotage because it's a mechanical locks. So it's not like the Houthis have to get all these missiles to close down the Red Sea. The Suez Canal is basically a ditch. The Panama Canal is a mechanical system. You can break those mechanical systems. You can close down the Panama Canal. So when China owns these ports, they do have Chinese agents. They do have Chinese workers. They can monitor all this trade and the movement of ships, including nuclear submarines. But they can also send people out to sink a ship in the lock. So it's important that we not only have to deal with Panama, but that there's a rapid response team that can secure that port if there is a war.
John, this trade war is going to hurt both the U.S. and China. That much is clear. Who do you think can incur more pain?
Well, the question is what happens when you incur pain? We have very different outlook on what pain is, the pain tolerance levels, and what happens when things get painful. When things get painful in the U.S., I want to believe that we come together as communities, we work through problems. When things get painful in China, there is more of a tendency to, or at least a fear from Chinese leader that there could be resistance to the government for the policies. So China is more worried about China than it is about the U.S. Because if all of those billions of people try to overthrow the government, they are in big trouble. Does that answer your question?
You believe the Chinese government, which it's not a democracy. There's no elections. There's nothing to worry about on that front. Is more worried about the sentiment of their people than the Americans?
Absolutely. When you have a communist country, your number one problem is maintaining those people in line. And you have, going back to the Soviet time and Mao, how they did it was brutal. Whether it was prison camps and actual killing people, starving people by taking over Ukraine. They tried that. It didn't work. In the last 20 years, 30 years, the Chinese government has tried another approach. Well, let's improve the lives of the Chinese. Let's build the economy. Let's give them more jobs. Let's give them transportation. And it has worked very effectively. But that has been underwritten by Wall Street. It's been underwritten by our imports into the United States. And now if we close those down, how can that improvement of the life of the Chinese continue? And if your life isn't improving, particularly if you have trouble getting food, and China is a very import dependent for their energy and some of their food products, if people starve, they revolt. And that's even going to happen in the United States. If we starve, we will revolt. That's a basic human tendency. So yes, they are, as a communist country, they are more worried about their own people taking over the government than us. Now, the U.S. can do a lot to pressure that or ease those tensions. And that's one thing. The second thing is these communist countries, they don't care about they have a longer outlook. They don't care as long as there aren't riots of causing more short-term pain. And they don't care about if people particularly even die. And this is a thing I continually hear with the Taiwan war scenario. If China invaded Taiwan, hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers will die. If we lose one aircraft carrier in the defense of Taiwan, there's going to be protests on the streets. It's going to be headline news. People are going to demand that we do something, either withdraw or pay back in the United States. In China, because they control the military, it's not that big of a deal. They are willing to take those losses in order to achieve their objectives, or at least historically, communist nations have been willing to do that, which leads to the question of if these tariffs slow down the Chinese economy to the point where there is famine, if there is loss of economic development, and there might not be. China could make deals with Europe and find other ways to grow or at least maintain the status quo. But if the economy starts crashing, that means that war is more likely, because war is a distraction from the woes that you have at home. And this is something we've seen throughout history. If people are about to riot, if the economy is really bad, the leaders are more likely to enter war as a distraction of the pain at home, and because war, throughout history spurns the economy and it puts people to work.
Rare earths, overrated, underrated. The headline today is, China cutting off rare earths from the U.S. I see a lot of hype about rare earths. I don't know. I'm not rare earth pilled. Are you rare earth pilled?
Well, we have all the rare earths we want, and not only us, but our friends in Greenland and elsewhere have it. The question is the permitting process is absolutely painful. We found rare earths in Arizona 2 years ago. We found uranium in Arizona, and Biden went and he made that entire area a national park, making it impossible to mine. That's the question. We have the most natural resource rich nation on earth. Our river system is better than the other G7 countries combined, which could provide low cost transportation.
John, isn't it worthwhile to have beautiful parks and make other people destroy their nature, and we just enforce it with our military and dollar?
You have to look at what scale. Obviously, people don't want it in their backyard, but if you fly over Europe, you're going to see used farmland. You're going to see civilization where people live. If you fly over the United States, there are enormous. You could fly for half an hour over parts of the United States and see absolutely nothing. What are we exactly protecting that land for? Now, here's the other thing: when it's done in other nations, it's not done to the same environmental standards. When I say cut red tape I'm not saying we go back to the 70s where we just put pollutants in the river, but there has to be, back then there was no penalty, right? And then we created all this red tape and we didn't really look at the accountability. Can we cut the red tape? And then if you break the law, you get sent to jail. Could that prevent poisons from entering? In this Arizona example, people say, well, the Colorado River is a source of drinking water. Well, that has to be protected, but we can't have this no rare earth here. And our close allies, look at Greenland. What kind of deal can we make in Greenland to get these rare earths there? That's mutually beneficial.
Let me ask you about timing. So, you said, you hope we're moving toward a deal with China. How long does Trump have to get a trade deal with China before trade really starts to hit the fan? I know, like, we talked to Porter, he said he's not concerned about inflation this year. He's concerned about inflation next year. How long does it take for these supply chain snarls to really get going and show up in inflation or productivity, that kind of stuff? What do you think the timeline we're looking at is?
I mean, it's completely dependent on the commodity. I mean, we're going to see a crash in cars fairly quickly with some of these tariffs. So that looks at the car carriers. That segment of the industry is going to be in difficult trouble. But you also have, as tariffs happen, and not just our tariffs, but tariffs between nations, we've kind of given a green light for other nations to work out tariffs between themselves. We may not have one global oil price. And those tankers may become very expensive as they're going longer ton miles in order to arbitrage the physical differences in price between regions. So again, it's not, the questions everyone is asking is, again, very linear questions. What is going to be the benefit or harm to the U.S. economy? This is a point of winners and losers. We are entering an era where you can either make a lot of money in Polymart or lose everything. It's not black and white anymore. There are going to be people who make extraordinary profits, and there are going to be people who lose everything. And the question is, can policy be adaptable so that the people who lose everything can be compensated and we can work around those problems? Or is DC just going to stick their nose in the ground and say, well, you just got to deal with the pain?
John, so let's say trade war manifests entirely and we see global trade really take a hit. Is there any company or industry or a segment of the economy where you'd be long, where you feel confident in investing? Or is this just the tide waters just coming back in?
Well, you have to, I mean, you can look at, as
do we just make money on the short side? Is that what we do?
I think the short side's the easy way to make money. The problem with the short side is I always end up losing money on the short side, even though I win, because you have these moments of hope where everyone piles in and then you hit your stops.
Right.
The question is, what will be profitable? Defense stocks. Now, will the defense majors be profitable? I don't think so. But you got these, HII is a shipbuilder. They build all our carriers, all our destroyers. You have Boeing, which is, $140 billion market cap. HII stuck down at $8 billion market cap. You have foreign stocks like Hanwha, Heavy Industries is building ships in Korea very successfully. They just bought Philly Shipyard. They're traded on the Korean Stock Exchange. If you can get out the United States, invest in them, that's something that could be amazingly profitable as we near shore. If we do what Will said, the Monroe Doctrine approach and lock out the overseas and increase trade into South America. Food is something I would very much look towards. Food is very hard to manage because the biggest private company in the United States is Cargill. Their reports are not public, but the movement of grain ships, the movement of fertilizer is, and Ukraine was the second largest agriculture exporter in the world prior to Russia. That's been dialed back significantly. There's going to be trouble in Africa, again, revolution or at least hunger and angst in those areas if the U.S. exports slow down and the other nations. And you have to look. I think what you have to look to is where kind of the fake industries are. For example, what's a fake industry? Brazil, agriculture, massive agricultural exports. But United States Midwest and Ukraine have natural nutrients in the soil in order to grow crops. We still need fertilizer in order to maximize yield. But if you took away the entire fertilizer market, we would still have enough to feed our nation. The rainforests that have been clear cut in Brazil need not only multiples of the fertilizer because they don't have the nutrients in the soil, but they need more bug spray, more pest control, more everything. That works in a linear economy where we have taps into these fertilizer fields and we have petrochemicals and they can move around. But if you start to shut off those imports into Brazil, they could have yield problems really quickly, and that could cause real geopolitical instability in other nations, right?
Let's go to military stuff because I know you follow the U.S. shipbuilding industry, naval affairs, that kind of stuff very closely. So if I had to pick one theme for your X account, it's U.S. shipbuilding. We need to build more ships, bring it back to the U.S., more submarines. But if Trump is kind of on this trajectory of like pulling back from this global policeman role, getting allies to do more of the security stuff, do we need more ships in that kind of world, or how do you see the U.S. shipbuilding playing in that kind of like U.S. pullback militarily world?
Well, I think that our Navy is our number one. If you listed all the reasons why we have a reserve currency status, the U.S. Navy is number one. Complete control over the world's oceans since World War II. And that has allowed the peace and prosperity, the globalization, the growth is all underpinned by the U.S. Navy. The movement of ships and trade, that 80-90% of the $45 to $70 trillion that happens on oceans. And people don't understand that. But yes, we want to rely on our allies, but our allies are completely weak. Look at Canada. Canada has 3 rusting submarines. They have 0 carriers, 0 destroyers. They have an old icebreaker, and they have a number of small frigates that can't work in the Red Sea. They can't fight drones on their own. So Canada effectively has no navy. The UK has the largest navy of our allies. They have 2 carriers, but they can only get 1 underway at a time, and they have trouble getting enough planes to put on those carriers. France and Italy do okay, but then Germany doesn't have any destroyers. It only has frigates. the bottom line is when we tried to reopen the Red Sea, we had Operation Prosperity Guardian, and Biden asked all our allies to come fight the Houthis, protect ships with us. Everyone except the UK and smaller countries said no. France and Italy did their own Operation Speedies to try to do it themselves. And that Red Sea is a lot more important for Europe because a larger percentage of the imports come directly through there. They really wanted to protect ships in the Red Sea. The most number of ships they were able to send at one time is three ships. So we think, and every congressional hearing that you watch over years, every time, our lack of sea lift logistics ships or lack of repair ships, every time it comes up, the admiral stands up there and says, well, we have this deficiency, but the strength of our allies. Has anyone actually looked at how many anti-drone missiles our allies have and what it takes to get in there? Germany had so few that when it was returning from the Pacific, the German Navy fleet decided to go around Africa rather than go through. This is against the Houthis. So if you have a higher level threat, like Russia, the Russian Navy's a joke, but Iran and particularly China, our allies cannot help there. Now you look at spending. I mean, what is Germany had the GDP? You see these figures of something between Mississippi and New Hampshire. How can they don't have the wealth that we have in order to rebuild the ships. And you look at something, Doge just saved $150 billion a year. That is, we could build 10 nuclear aircraft carriers for $150 billion. And we could do that now and you wouldn't notice it because that money would be diverted. I don't think that's a good plan, but it's possible. Where is the Netherlands or Denmark going to come up with $150 billion to revitalize all the ships in their fleet? That's one thing. Second thing is they're more worried about army and air because the Soviets have a stronger army and everyone's enamored with air. So we got Japan and Korea are doing a great job rebuilding their naval fleets, and Australia's trying, but our allies are just not able to build them. We can build them. We have the history. We have the money. Most of the shipbuilding in China was underwritten by American banks. It's just turn off the tap into China and pour it into the United States. And when you talk about allies, part of this tariff deal, I've been saying over and over, is do the Toyota production model where you build a Japanese car factory in Mississippi, you bring in Japanese to man it, and then you train your American replacements over years. That's something that we could ramp up within a year if we invite those allies in to invest in American industry. So
John, I want to talk about the Houthis and the drones. I'm happy you brought that up. So, from my perspective, I'm not a military expert, but it seems like what the drones have done is give asymmetric power to weaker parties, right? And so, countries like Turkey, Iran, they can have an outsized influence because no matter how, we have, $15 billion carriers, but if it only takes, say, a $8 million drone swarm to take it out, then doesn't that just render a lot of the power of the sea obsolete for the big powers like China and the US?
Yes. And this is part of where you can make a lot of money in Polymarket because there's the conventional thinking. And if you ask most navalists today, they're going to say drones, the carrier is still important. The carrier is not obsolete because of drones. But the question is why? Drones are absolutely revolutionary. I mean, you have Houthis shooting off 20,000 drones, and we're sending $10 million missiles to shoot them down.
It's $10 million to take out 20,000. $20,000.
And the problem is you go with a numbers game. When the Houthis first sent ballistic missiles, this is something, if you want to make a lot of money in Polymarket, get back to first principles, get back to math. I predicted that the Navy would not be able to secure the Red Sea because we have 75 destroyers in the nation. 1/3 are in maintenance period. 1/3 are being transitioned back to active duty, change of crew. So 1/3 of that 75. And then each of those destroyers has 96 missiles, which have to be anti-submarine missiles, anti-ship missiles, anti-layer Tomahawk missiles, and anti-air drone missiles. So you have 96 divided by 4, and you can put more anti-air missiles in. But, you have a percentage of a percentage of a percentage. And when those anti-drone missiles that cost $10 million against a $20,000 drone run out, that ship has to sail for 2 weeks because we can't reload at sea to Bahrain and reload it and then come back. If you just look at the number of destroyers, the range of the missiles, the size of the Red Sea, it was a very simple mathematical problem saying that the amount of destroyers and the reload time of this could very easily be overwhelmed by the Houthis. And everyone, consensus was the Navy was going to protect the ships.
So is the
But
company
the math wasn't there.
John, is the company to build right now a drone company, which is basically just a swarm of drones that follows every carrier, and if a drone comes to attack it, those drones just actually go out like kamikazes? Is that in demand? Should we just build that?
Well, okay, so there are two things here. One thing is, I said drones are absolutely revolutionary. They're changing everything, and they're going to find ways in order to penetrate a carrier group. But the other thing is the physical size of the Pacific Ocean is absolutely enormous. And those drones have very limited range. We have even Saronic and Anduril building small submarines, small boats. The physics of it, get back to the physics, cannot go as fast as larger ships, and they can't carry the fuel and reload capabilities. So say China invades Taiwan, and say we have 100,000 drones that we gave to Taiwan, or we have there that can fight off the Chinese ships. Well, after they shoot their missiles or run out of fuel, they got to come back and refuel. If we don't have the logistics ships to provide those reloads, to fix the drones, to provide the new munitions, they are useless. So the question is, drones are absolutely revolutionary, but it doesn't change the absolute size of the ocean. The Houthis use it because they are at that particular choke point. But they don't make carriers obsolete because that carrier can move at 40, 45 knots where the drones cannot move that fast because the physics of the size of the thing to do it, or if they're in the air, they're going to run out of fuel long before they catch the carrier.
But so let's look at it just with what we have today, right? Polymarket, we've got several markets on when Houthis will agree to end shipping attacks. If it's by April 30th, 10% chance, May 31st, 35% chance. By June 30th, it goes up to a 58% chance. So it's looking like more optimistic on some kind of deal towards the middle of the summer. But at the same time, we have another market. Will the Suez Canal traffic recover to pre-Houthi levels before July? And that's at an 8% chance. So it's saying, I mean, a lot of these have been saying, maybe we get some kind of deal if Trump keeps pounding them and forces them to the negotiating table. But I don't know. It seems like in the short term, the market's not very optimistic about any kind of resolution to the Red Sea.
Well, the market's also listening to the ship owners. This is just something that they won't tell you. They don't want to go through the Suez Canal anymore. They're making a lot of money with the reduced capacity caused by all of these ships going around South Africa. I've been tweeting a lot about this new green deal, this green global tariff that the UN, International Maritime Organization, has done. What they've already put in effect is speed limits on ships. Now, why would a ship owner want to go slow? It's the ship owners that are pushing those, because if their fleet goes slower, there's going to be a competitive disadvantage. If every ship goes slower to save the environment, you're going to need a lot more ships to maintain the same level of capacity. So those are two very different questions. Three questions. One that should be asked is the military going to be successful on their... Sorry, I don't know why I'm having balloons. I think it's my hand gesture.
I love it. We're going to keep it.
Yeah, we got to keep it in.
Yeah.
What are the military metrics, and are those successful? Two is, will the Houthis come to the table? And if we've killed all of our leadership, who exactly in the Houthis can make that deal? Who has the power to? And then the third is, will shipping resume? Well, even if the first two are successful, the ship owners may still fight and say, well, you got most of the Houthis, but it's still too dangerous. And the question is what the insurance rates are for those ships. So the insurance market may say, hey, it's safe. Or they may say, we got to wait 6 months. Or we'll give it a year because the insurance guys are slower. And it might be all of the ship owners behind the scenes, not publicly in the smoke-filled rooms in London, say, hey, insurance guys, you're going to their insurance agent. I'll continue to use you as an insurance agent if you delay, keep insurance rates high so I can keep profiting by going around.
John, I get the idea that if you have to slow down all maritime trade, you have to build more ships. That's more money for the ship owners. But in the meantime, let's say the insurance rates still stay elevated for ships going through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, and the ships have to go around South Africa. Are those trips more profitable? Do they get paid on the amount of time they're on the water? Do they actually make more money, or is it the same level of profitability?
Well, they lose money because they have to, their fuel goes.
Right, but do they pass on, in terms of the markups that they pass on to?
Well, shipping container is a commodity. So if you suck out all capacity from the system, rates go up, right?
Right.
And they pass on the additional fuel costs to the consumer. So it's segment individual. So if insurance rates went down by 50% tomorrow, that would allow bulkers and ships with low cost commodity because they have a lower insurance overall cost. If you have a 25,000 TEU container ship with $2 to $3 billion of goods inside, it's going to have to come down a lot more than 50% in order to take that risk. Where if you have a ship full of cement or grain, that insurance rate will. So going back to the beginning, I said we are entering a world of chaos where there will be winners and losers, and whoever can determine those winners and losers, those are the people who are going to profit.
All right. I have a confession to make. On Twitter, I tend to follow some, let's call them fringe geopolitical analysts. And on some of these corners... Am
I in that basket? Or,
no, I wouldn't put you in that basket. And
you're 70% of the way there.
70%.
And some of them have been circulating this theory that the Houthis have been scoring some hits on U.S. naval assets in the Red Sea that may not be disclosed, shall we say. And I don't know. I'm not a Navy guy, but if you had to put odds on that, what would you put? Is that complete bullshit, or is there some outside chance that it could be true?
Well, I'm about to reveal my number one Polymarket tip here. And I've learned this for years. When I wrote the book on the Fire on the Horizon, BP, there were people who said that I was a Chinese sub that blew up the oil rig. There's a very easy way to have with 99% accuracy if a conspiracy is true or not. And here's the tip. If the conspiracy, like contrails, requires a lot of government effort and work, think of all of the chemicals having to be transported to all of the airports in the world, being hidden, all the paperwork involved, that is a very difficult to put in the contrails and sterilize us all. The government's not that competent. If the conspiracy is the government just has to do nothing, it could be the JFK assassination. Well, that day the Secret Service just didn't do their job. The conspiracy has a lot bigger chance of being true. So in your particular conspiracy theory there, that would take a lot of effort by various governments to be true, because you have to hide. You have to 5,000 people on a Navy ship. You got to make sure they all stay quiet. You need to put filters on the internet when they get home. You got to make sure they're not talking to family. You got to board every ship that passes it with a camera. That takes an enormous. You'd have to hide satellites. That's very logistically difficult. So I'd say with 99% accuracy, that one is not true.
John, I'm going to end you off on one last question. Who blew up Nord Stream?
I wish I knew. I think it's most likely that I'm guessing here. I don't know. But again, going back to conspiracy theories, if all we have to do as a government, if Ukraine comes to us with a plan and got this plan and that plan, and we're like, here are the reasons why the plan won't work, and we put Navy SEALs to tell them why their plan won't work, and here are, by the way, ways we can fix it. And then the entire U.S. government just has to look the other way and move the satellites while that's happening. I think that's example of a conspiracy that's probably true because it just required the government to literally do nothing and let the Ukrainians handle it.
You said it, not me.
I have one more before we
But
go.
it's just a
So
guess.
we're talking choke points, and we hit Panama Canal, we hit Suez Canal, but we've not yet hit Strait of Hormuz. So there's been a lot of talk. Some very serious forecasters talking about war with Iran scenarios, and we have several markets. We have clash with Iran. We also have Strait of Hormuz closed. But I'm just curious, regardless of if you think it's going to happen or not, say Iran is attacked, say they try to shut the Strait of Hormuz, what happens the next day? What is the U.S. Navy response? And if they're not able to get the Suez Canal under control militarily, why should we be optimistic about the Strait of Hormuz? Like, how is it different?
Well, okay, so first of all, that's going to be a blow to our reserve currency because all of that crude oil moving in is not adding to the liquidity of the fund. Is that a big enough deal to get us on installed there? I don't know. We have powerful allies there who we have, historically wanted to appease. Is that enough to override the Defense Department's desire not to get into regional wars in the Middle East? Remember, Elbridge Colby, who is the number one proponent of pulling back from Ukraine, pulling back from the Middle East, he just got confirmed a couple of days ago to be heads of plans in the DoD. So there are going to be forces in the DoD who said, this is not worth it. But then there are going to be allies, there are going to be economists with the reserve currency, and there are going to be oil majors. If you go to a naval conference in D.C., you won't see Exxon, you won't see Shell. Go to a naval conference in Bahrain, and the top executives from all the oil majors are there because they are the ones pressuring the Navy and the government to maintain that Strait of Hormuz. That's question one. Question number two is what's the common denominator on all of these, whether it's Panama, the Houthis, Russia? I mean, China owning ports in Panama. You have China supplying something like 80%. A new report came out of the machinery and equipment that Russia needs to rebuild for the war in Ukraine. Where are the Houthis getting these $20,000 drones and ballistic missiles? They're getting it from Iran. Where is the vast majority of Iran's wealth coming from? It's coming from oil exports and other exports into China. So the question isn't what Iran's reaction is going to be and what our reaction to Iran is going to be. The Defense Department is going to want to step aside that. The allies and partners are going to want to push for that. But what's really going to, the deep secret, the real thinkers who are focused solely on China, like Bridge Colby's, and what China wants Iran to do in that scenario, that's what's going to actually play out. That would be a proxy war with China. And so it's really up to the Chinese leaders and the people who are very focused on potential wars with China, in my opinion.
John Konrad, thanks so much for joining us. What's the best way for people to connect with you?
Gcaptain.com is my website. We're Gcaptain on Twitter, and my personal Twitter handle is John Konrad with a K.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks
so much.
That was awesome.
Nothing in today's episode has been financial, investment, legal, or any other type of professional advice. Anything provided is for informational purposes only and is not meant to be an endorsement of any type of activity or any particular market or product. Terms of service on Polymarket.com prohibit U.S. persons and persons from certain other jurisdictions from using Polymarket to trade, although data and information is viewable globally.